This morning I am in Salt Lake City talking with Rita T Reusch, who is Professor of Law and Law Library Director Emerita of the University of Utah's S.J. Quincy College of Law. In addition, Rita also served as Director of Computing Services from 1998 until 2008. And she was at the law school from 1986 until her retirement in 2012. Rita, I'm delighted to have you here this morning and to be able to talk to you for our oral history project. And as we start, it's customary to ask about you as an individual. Could you tell us a little bit about your life, perhaps when you were young and today?
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was the fifth of 9 children. And I had a very classic 50s, 60s childhood, as life was in those days. I married my law school classmate in 1975, so 40 years next year for us.
Congratulations.
And we had 2 children, a daughter and a son, who are both in their 30s now. And I have 1.3 grandchildren at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like an interesting time. And
Yeah.
grandchildren are wonderful.
Yes,
I
it's very
think,
fun.
I have a couple of them, and my goal is to spoil the heck out of them and send them home to their parents to
Yeah.
deal with.
He's very, very fun. He's a real frisky kid.
Yeah, and soon you'll have another one.
Yep.
So that'll be nice.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, do you have any, besides spoiling grandchildren or a grandchild now, do you have any hobbies or particular passions or other pursuits that occupy time outside of when you're doing other things?
Well, my career and my family were for many years my passions and was really enough for me. Many times I wondered how I dealt with it all and was able to accomplish things that I did. But since retirement, and as my children got older, I've really enjoyed, well, certainly on the retirement side of things, I've enjoyed this leisure lifestyle. It's such just the new pace of life is just is very relaxing and enjoyable to me. I enjoy walking and hiking. We have a dog that I bring out several times a week up into the Wasatch, into the canyons of the Wasatch here in Salt Lake. We love to travel. We travel, we do car trips, we do trips here in the U.S. and overseas. We're going to Italy next month. And,
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, really enjoy travel. I love reading. I love reading. I do yoga. Just did yoga yesterday. It was wonderful.
That's supposed to help keep you in good shape, too.
Yeah, well, and kind of bends you out of shape sometimes, too.
So I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have an interesting life in retirement. And it's the old, you wake up every morning and say, oh, today is Saturday. I don't have to go to work.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or those of us, those watching this who are not retired, can at least look forward to those days, hopefully.
It's amazing after the real structure of the life we led.
Well, you get to a point, and maybe you're already there, I certainly think I am, where I sort of get involved in so many things that I think, well, how did I ever have time to do any work in the first place?
Yeah.
Although maybe some people thought I didn't take the time to do any work in the first place, I don't know. Well, we won't get into this. This is your interview, not mine. Could we move on now towards into your professional role in life? Could you talk about the degrees you hold and where you got them?
I got my BA degree from the University of Minnesota in 1970, and the degree was actually awarded in 1972. This is a footnote, but for those of us from the Vietnam area, you can imagine graduating from college in the spring of 1970 when life was so crazy. And it was put on hold for a bit, and then so the degree was actually granted in 72. Then I got my JD degree from the University of Idaho in 1975, and my master's in law librarianship at the University of Washington in 1978.
Well, before we talk a little bit more about that, that era you just mentioned, the student unrest and the Vietnam War era, is probably unlike anything that has ever existed in this country, other than perhaps some of the Civil War era.
It was
a
amazing.
lot of dissent. Our colleague, who was the director or law librarian, they call him, at Yale, Art Charpentier. Is the only one I know who had a electronic or electric bullhorn in his closet. I saw it one time when I was there, and he had used that during the Unrest period to help keep a lid on things at the law school at Yale. And actually, people gave him credit for intervening just in the right way as a faculty person, and calming everything down at a time when it could have really gotten out of hand. And so, that was Arthur
It was an amazing
Charpentier.
time.
Yeah.
It was.
He was also quite an accomplished colleague of ours as a law librarian, and highly
I never knew
regarded.
him, yeah.
Well, he was quite a person. Well, I think you knew somebody else that was also from that era and very, very highly regarded, and that was Marion Gallagher.
Yes.
You studied in her program, as I
did,
recall.
yes,
It was
yeah.
before she retired, and now it's Penny Hazelton who
Right,
runs
yeah.
that. Could you tell us a little bit about what that was like? I mean, she's somebody that people recognize because the association's highest award is named in her honor, but can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
Mrs. G was an amazing person. She really was. She was a great teacher, mentor, and friend. In fact, when I was cleaning up my files at the University of Utah, getting ready for retirement, I ran into a file of letters and correspondence with her that I had over the years. She kept up such good contact and was always ready to talk to you on the phone and drop you notes and Christmas cards, and she was also really good with her advice and very solicitous. She was also really very savvy about the profession and about libraries and what we were doing. The program was pretty informal. We had a lot of the classes, of course, were in the regular library school up at Suzzallo Library on the University of Washington campus, but we also spent quite a bit of time in the law library. A lot of it was based on what we call today experiential learning. We were in the library and doing a lot of the experiencing the various functions of the library and the serials and cataloging and then also seminar type. We were a small group, seminar type classes on law librarianship.
Did she ever have you go down to the King County Law Library? I don't know if Jim McCardle was still the
I
librarian.
remember the name. I don't remember. Well, yes, we did. Yes, we did a visit. We visited the King County Law Library. We also went down. We went down to UPS when UPS was the name of the law school that's now Seattle University.
University of Puget Sound.
At UPS
it was in Tacoma, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was in Tacoma, and it was so new. It was not even in its building they eventually had in Tacoma. It was in a strip mall in Tacoma, but they had a Walter terminal. This was our very first exposure to Westlaw. So
was
we
that
went
one
down
of those great big humongous
It was,
little
and it was
things?
extremely limited, and it was extremely limited functionality.
Yeah.
But University of Washington hadn't even gotten one yet, and so this was kind of a field trip to go see this thing.
That was in the days, and I think you had a telephone sitting in this cradle next to
Yes.
it, and you had to dial the number of
Yes,
the computer
yeah.
and pick up the thing and listen to it answer, and then hang it, put the thing into an
Right,
acoustical coupler.
yeah.
And then the computer would talk to the terminal, and you'd suddenly go online.
It was a mystery, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then you'd call up a page, and you'd watch it load slowly
Yeah.
from the top to the bottom, because the
Yeah.
speeds were a tiny bit
Very,
slower
very
than we're
slow.
used to
Yeah,
now.
For sure,
You know, that must have been interesting. I mentioned McCardle because I know that Marion sent had a lot of her students go down there, and a few of them actually had jobs there to
Yeah,
help pay
yeah.
the bills.
yeah.
But McCardle had a very different approach to law library
Mhm.
operations than Marion did.
Yes,
And
yeah.
She wanted basically to have people be aware of that it wasn't just her model was the
Yes,
only
right,
one out
right,
there.
yeah. And the field trip experience also did that was very important to her, and Penny has continued to this day, sending the students out. And I did my field trip. I went back to the University of Minnesota Law School and spent a month at that law library, and that was it. And George Grossman was the director then, and that was a really wonderful experience too as part of my education.
Well, that sounds like you had a good background.
Yeah.
Well, you went from there into the real world.
Yeah.
Could we talk a little bit about that, your early jobs, and of course, eventually here at the University of Utah,
Yeah.
where, among other things, do you remember who one of your predecessors some years back here was?
George.
Well, another one was Marion.
Oh, that's
Marion
right. Yes,
Gallagher.
yes.
She
Marion
was librarian.
yes,
She
yes.
had gone through the program as it existed in the very late 30s.
Yes.
When Arthur Beardsley, her predecessor there, was starting it.
And I actually
then
had-
she came to the University
Yes.
of Utah for her first job.
And one
library
time I
school.
found some old papers of the library. Oh, no, it was old faculty papers. A member of our faculty was doing a history of the law school, and he had found some old minutes from old faculty meetings, and the minutes were taken by Miss Gould,
Oh.
which was Marion Gallagher's maiden name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yes, and then again, George Grossman had also been director here.
Now, I'm
before I went to
assuming that
Minnesota.
was her mother.
No, that
No.
was Marion Gallagher. Was
Oh, it was Miss Gould.
She was Marion Gould Gallagher.
She wasn't married yet.
She wasn't married,
All right.
and so she was
yeah.
the faculty. She took the notes at the faculty meetings.
Uh-huh.
And then this was in the early 40s.
Because in her latter years, she was, Marion was widowed
Right.
quite suddenly and
Right, and
tragically.
young.
Her husband, I understand, died in a fire in their home.
Yes.
And she wasn't there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then she lived with her mother. They had a house in Seattle on the north end of Green Lake for a
Yeah.
while. And then as they both aged a bit, especially the mother, they moved into a place on the hill right above downtown Seattle, and which is where she lived the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting.
Mhm.
Well, let's get back to what we're
Okay.
supposed to be talking about, you and your career.
Yeah.
So you left the University of Washington program as a graduate and went to North Dakota, as I recall.
No, well, first of all, before I even went to library school, I spent 2 years in a clerkship at the Idaho Supreme Court.
All right.
And one of the reasons I want to bring that up is, to me, that was another kind of reinforcing reason for wanting to go into the profession I did, because that experience really emphasized the importance of research, thorough and accurate research. When you go to your judge and you say, "Judge, this is a case of first impression," you better be sure that this is a case of first impression. And just knowing how important research was and how important a complete library was really helped me kind of focus on the profession more as well. So then after my time at University of Washington, I went back to Idaho, and I spent 3 years at the University of Idaho Law Library as assistant librarian. I also taught research and legal writing during those years. But both at Idaho and at North Dakota, where I was director for 5 years, there were small environments, small staffs, small budgets, but very good experiences for that. I had to do everything. I had to know how to do everything. I had to know how to do all of the reference and all of the cataloging and serials management and bringing in the budget. And so I learned really a lot on the job of running those libraries. But it was also because of the small environment. You knew the students really well. You knew the faculty really well, and your small staff, you had to work all together to make things happen. So they were great experiences for me, and I enjoyed both institutions a lot.
I'll bet it was somewhat cold in the winter back there.
It was very cold in the winter.
Yes.
When we decided to move to Utah, my husband said, "We'll never be cold again."
Well, he
It is.
wasn't aware of the fact that it is a little nippy here in the winter.
Yeah,
Certainly
but
not
not-
very far
yeah.
into the mountains.
Yeah, not Grand Forks cold, that's for sure.
Well, that's probably true, yeah. I remember driving through that part of the country a couple of times in the last few years. And I see the gates, of course this is about this time of the year, we're in September now. And I see the gates along the interstates that they can close and the lights that turn on telling you to go to the
Yeah.
nearby town or
Right,
return to
yeah.
the nearby town.
Yeah.
And I gather that's because of the blizzards and
Right.
really wretched weather.
Yes,
You just
yes,
can't
sure.
have traffic out on those
No.
roads up in the Dakotas.
That's true. And Wyoming.
In Wyoming. I noticed once you get over towards Minnesota side, then things start to change. It
The
gets
hills are rolling a
greener,
little
it
bit
gets
more.
a little more like that, and I don't
Yeah.
see the gates along the road anymore.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, let's talk about your job here at Utah. So in North Dakota, while you were there, you were there were small staff, so you did a little of everything.
Yeah.
Did you teach anything while you were there? Or?
I just research and writing.
Yeah,
I
because you
didn't-
had
I
a
didn't-
faculty appointment, as I recall.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Yeah.
I did.
Okay. Well, should we move on to Utah? As you
Yeah.
did, we will never be cold again. Well,
Right.
not like that.
Yeah.
Not that cold, huh?
Yeah. So I came in 1986,
Mhm.
and I've had a wonderful 26 years at the University of Utah. I enjoyed it very much. I had a very challenging time, as we all did, as we were library directors and librarians working with the incredible change that was going on. When I came to Utah, we had 5 sets of the Pacific Reporter and 5 sets of the Federal Reporter and multiple U.S. codes, USCAs and USCSs, and all of the copies of 4 copies of Harvard Law Review and all of this, and we were still doing everything with Cardex. Everything was changing.
And a paper card
Just
catalog
bringing
too,
up
I'll
bringing
bet.
up our first. We had Notice, our first system.
Mhm.
I was highly dependent on Ellen Uyang, our head of technical services, in implementing that. But it was a huge challenge for all of us. It was our first automated system. The retiring of the card catalog was a huge ceremonial thing for us. We first moved it over into a corner, and then it went away completely. We all thought that was such a tragic thing, but it was. But I think it was even harder to retire the Cardex because there was so much history on that Cardex. Then it was gone.
Checking in all the continuation
Yeah,
items.
and
That's
all
what
the
Cardex
payment
is for,
records and-
yeah,
yeah,
and
and
keeping
payment.
track of which ones you'd paid, which ones you
Exactly.
still had to pay.
Right. Yeah. And again with Lexis and Westlawn and all of that coming in. When I first came, they were dedicated.
Mhm.
We had, we had a little room with Lexis and Westlawn machines,
Mhm.
and then we moved to a larger room with more machines. But they were still dedicated, and there was still so much happening with all of that, and just all of the challenges of dealing with the collections and the digital world,
Mhm.
and bringing your people along and hiring your people, but it was a very stimulating time
Mhm.
and a wonderful time to be a library director and to be able to introduce these things and to teach the students and to teach the faculty about all of this. So that was very good.
I used to occasionally during that era think back to what it must have been like for our predecessors, their immediate predecessors. There were changes in law libraries during their era, mostly because they were getting larger and the collections were becoming more
Yes.
diverse.
Yes.
And you had to have new ways of accommodating those realities, such as, much more cataloging and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And all of it manual.
Yeah,
all
but
of it manual.
what they started and what they finished their careers, the library wasn't that much different. Whereas in our era,
Yeah.
and certainly now,
Yeah.
there's just been a huge change.
Yeah.
And you were part of all that
Yeah.
at Utah.
Well, and it was during practically the entire time I was there, they kept talking about a new building.
Mhm.
We need a new building. We desperately need it. We were in a 1960 building, and the library actually was an addition that happened in 1980, but was inadequate from the very beginning. We had a compact shelving in my very early years there, but it was just towards the end and during my retirement that the prospect of a new building was coming to fruition.
Mhm.
And in fact, it's under construction right now.
Oh,
They will be the first year in the new building will be next year, planning for a library today, planning for what an academic law library needs to be, what the book collections are going to be like, the physical spaces. It's quite challenging. It's very exciting, and I'm excited for them.
Yeah.
But going back to my years, I think one of the things that I'm most proud of was our service program at the University of Utah that we developed in among the librarians and the staff. We had very, very strong reference services, very strong faculty support, very strong document delivery kinds of things. Document delivery were things like a librarian would drive down to BYU to pick up some things and to look things up, you know, when the faculty member needed it by tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
We also had a very strong teaching program for students. The librarians, the JD librarians, and we had 6 JD librarians for a law school of 400 students. It was a very rich and talented group. Would teach small sections of legal research, the basic legal research. And I know it's controversial about how much you can teach them in the first semester of the first year, but we did it. And we knew it was only the beginning. It was only very basic. But we felt very strongly that we had to be a presence for them from the very beginning. And that the concepts and the vocabulary and the basics of research had to be part of the very beginning of law school. And we did it. We did a really good job on it, and they still do it very well there. We also taught an advanced legal research course, which I and among my colleagues we developed and offered annually as an elective. And it was not, I mean, it was a popular course, but it wasn't required. So, but the students who took it very much appreciated it.
They had gone out into the real world after their first or second year and did a little work in a law firm and discovered there were a few deficits in their research technique.
Yeah, they still needed to learn more, and they knew that. The ones who took it knew how important this was.
Must have been very different, the student, sort of the way the students responded to the course when it was in the first year, the basic legal research, as opposed to the advanced course.
Well, the format was different, of course, and it was much more in depth. But yes, the students who were taking that course were there because they wanted to be, and they knew how important it was. And of course, the first year students, they're not as appreciative of how important this little course was. So
they're also still a little bit shell-shocked by all the changes in
of course.
Law schools, like compared to anything they probably studied up until then.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas when you get them in the upper years, second or third year, they at least are more used to law school as an environment.
Yeah, and they're just more comfortable. Period.
Well, you said earlier that you didn't teach really when you were at North Dakota with a small staff and so on. You probably had your day job was really the day and evening and night all in one. But here at Utah, you had a well-developed staff of people with
well, I wouldn't say well-developed. It was never a very. We were never as many people as we could have used. But it was certainly a much more of a staff than I was used to at the
Well, I guess I'm not trying to suggest that it would be
Yeah.
more than you need, because we never quite get to that point. But,
but
at
also,
least
as things change, as the collections
they're
change.
sophisticated and
Yes.
they know their business. They're
Yeah.
people that you don't have to
Yeah.
worry about by keeping
Well,
an eye
and
on
as the
everything.
focus went from collection management, and you no longer needed so many people in serials, but you needed, as I was saying earlier, we had a much stronger services orientation. You know, that changes the who the people are and how many and where you deploy them, and all of those things are very important too. Yeah.
So you had colleagues who from the library who did teach in the research and advanced legal research. But you also took on more of a teaching role.
I did, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that?
In the early 90s, I started collaborating with a colleague in teaching the intellectual property survey course. And I took the copyright unit of the survey course, and that was what got me into it. I started teaching, and it was about 1 month's worth of copyright, which is to teach all of copyright in 1 month. And a survey course is a challenge in and of itself. But that was my beginning. And then later on, I developed a standalone seminar called Problems in Copyright Law, which was, being a seminar, it was a paper-based course, and It was a much more intensive look at copyright law over the course of a semester. I loved teaching that. It was challenging. The subject matter is hard, and it's very statutory, but it was very, very fun because copyright is such a challenge these days. And given the focus of the course, problems in copyright law, the students, selected problematic areas. So we were always just pushing at the boundaries of copyright and what it was going through in various subject matters and various rights management issues, and of course technology, all of those things. So that was a great course. Also then, I began, I taught, again going back to the survey, a couple times I taught the trademark unit, and then got very interested in the subject of trademark law as a branch of intellectual property law, and later on developed a standalone course in trademark law, which was a course, and again, very statutory, but very, very interesting stuff, and I love teaching that as well. And I taught both of them right up till the end, in alternate years. 1 year I teach the trademarks, and the next year I do the seminar.
That sounds like it was an interesting thing.
It was.
You mentioned
It
your
was.
job. I assume you have views on librarians teaching. Do you want to state any of those?
Well, this in some respects goes to the whole status thing of library directors, which is of course a big controversial issue in the profession. And I think a library director who is teaching a substantive law course and is included in the discussions of the curriculum at that level has much more credibility when they're bringing other kinds of issues to the table, dealing with the library and dealing with library services. I don't think it's critical. To me, it was very, very stimulating at a time when, again, as you said, I had a very competent staff of very good librarians who were doing very, very well in the day-to-day issues in the library. But also, you mentioned earlier that I might have had time on my hands. No, most of my course prep for my copyright and trademark stuff was done on the evenings and weekends. I spent a lot of time on those courses.
So you were still worried, you had your job, your day job, your evening job, and your night job going.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
I can understand that, especially a course like copyright, where
Yes.
you really have to be up and with all the, must be tremendous changes, not so much in the statute, but how you deal with it because of all this new technology.
Yes, and also with the seminar, there were the papers, and there were the drafts of the papers, and the meetings with students. All of that was very time-consuming and had to be fit in as well.
Must have been nice, though, to be able to connect with students in different ways.
Yes,
than
yes,
just in the library.
They were.
I know
They were
as
good
we
kids.
grew at American, where I was director, and developed more expertise in the middle range, I became more of a back office person there, except for when I was teaching, which I also taught a couple of substantive courses during the year. And I found that the best way to connect to students, because my job in the library, my role had sort of withdrawn me from some of that.
Yes.
I had people out there at the reference desk and the circ desk.
No, that's right. The student contact. Well, I taught the basic legal research course through always, so I had first year contact then for my 2 sections, but this was another way to connect with students that was great.
My last year when I was still teaching, the colleague who was teaching a contracts course in the first year, and I had not taught first year classes since I had been at the University of Houston many, many years back, because my courses were in the second or third year, they were electives. And one of them was admiralty law, and they have in their case book, in this contracts, they had a contract involving some people who'd gone on a cruise, and there were problems, and they were bringing a lawsuit against the cruise line. And the question came up, it was dealt with in a very different way by the court than the students had seen in their more ordinary common law-based contracts cases. And so the case was in there to sort of show them that there were other models.
Yeah.
And my colleague asked me if I'd come down and talk with the students about this case and why it was so different. And I did so, and it was so much fun. I almost wished I had done it other years. It was the last year, and I was asked to do this. But they were so eager to learn, and I mean, they engaged me in a way that the second and third year students really didn't. And it must have been interesting to teach in that first year, as well as your upper development.
Yeah, I enjoyed, but I enjoyed both. I really did enjoy both, but there is a difference.
Well, you know, those of us in faculty roles, and perhaps some who aren't, also get involved in service of various sorts to the profession, to the institution. By profession, I mean, you know, different associations. ALL often for those of us in law libraries, but the ABA, ALS, Association of American Law Schools, that is. You've done some of that. Would you like to talk a little bit about some of that?
Sure. With AALL, was such a wonderful organization for us professionally. It was the experiences, the colleagues I met over the years, the annual meetings where you'd get together with people and keep contacted with them throughout the year was absolutely amazing. And I served on committees, many committees, chaired several committees, and again, to get to know colleagues from different kinds of libraries, from different parts of the country. Very, very interesting. I think the committee work that I did in AALL, there's a couple of them that were highlights. First of all, the work I did in the Citations Committee. It's hard to recall now how controversial that was at the time and what a big deal it was. But in the early 1990s, as electronic research was becoming more and more prevalent, and the importance of the book reporter was becoming less of the primary source for people to go to, people started talking about whether we ought to have a way to refer to cases, and initially it was just case law that we were talking about, other than the very proprietary, mostly, West Publishing Company citation to cases. And so this became known as the medium neutral, that is you could cite something whether it was online or in a book. Mm-hmm. It was called the Universal Citation because it was applicable to any place, and also it was vendor neutral, which brought in that the proprietary aspect. The committee was started out as a task force, and I worked very closely with Lynn Foster at the time, and several others, and working on this task force that then later evolved to be a committee which I chaired, and which the association ultimately endorsed as an association the concept of universal citation as a method of dealing with the very changing environment of citation to cases. It was extremely controversial because many of the vendors, particularly West, were opposed to this. Many conservatives, or I don't know, conservatives or old guard, or I don't know what you'd call them, but there were even people within the profession who felt that we didn't really need this, that this system worked fine. Yeah. But in any case, that was a very hot point within, and very hot subject, hot topic for several years within the association, and I was kind of like the flashpoint for it for several years in the 90s.
Caught a fair amount of flack over the years because I also was involved in that a bit. I was elected to the presidency of the association as this was starting to come to a conclusion.
Yes, yeah.
And it had been a big thing, especially with Carol Billings, who was my immediate
Carol was a very
predecessor's president.
Yeah.
She was very adamant that this was the right direction that you were going.
Uh-huh.
But the person who ran against me had a very different view. He was more the traditionalist.
Yeah.
And, I thought, what if by chance he'd been elected? What would have happened?
Would it have taken?
What would have happened? Because he was pretty pretty set in his ways
Yeah.
on what he thought was the correct approach. And it was a different approach. It was the other approach.
Well, and as time has gone by and we've learned the whole thing is somewhat died down, there still is the universal Utah is a universal citation state, and we use the universal citation format and with numbered paragraphs for all reported cases in Utah, with the parallel citation to the Pacific Reporter. So it has continued to be an issue. Yes, it was controversial. That's for sure.
Well, I may have derailed your train of thought.
No.
You were about to shift focus.
Yeah,
Some of the other activities.
The next big one I think I would focus on was I was a co-chair with Gail Warren of the committee that was the special committee on the future of law libraries in a digital age. And that was in the early 2000s. And we, the committee, there were about a dozen of us, were really charged with asking the big questions about the future of law libraries, and do some real visioning and envisioning and scenarios. And we produced a report that's a monograph called "The Future of Law Libraries," Beyond the Boundaries, the future of law libraries
I remember that.
in the digital age. And so the notion of boundaries was something that was became the metaphor of the boundaries was something that we played with, and that came up so often in so many aspects of our discussions. So that was a mind-bending experience, being part of that committee. So those committees, there were others, Constitution and Bylaws and Personnel and Elections and many other, Copyright Committee. I chaired the Copyright Committee for a while, and the Copyright Committee dealt with a lot of many of the issues that came up with the citation reform thing too, but other aspects, so many aspects of the public domain aspect of the law, and how that applies, and how law libraries deal with that aspect within the confines of copyright law, was part of what we discussed a lot in the Copyright Committee. So that was interesting.
Well, I think a lot of our newer readers may not realize that in this country, one company, West Publishing, now it's Reuters Thompson owns it and uses their name pretty much, but West was developed a system of reporting cases in paper, books, and pamphlets before the book would come out, or advance sheets we call them, back in about the 1870s. And
St. Paul, Minnesota.
Essentially, yes, your old hometown. Yeah. And essentially did for the profession, the legal profession, and for the country as a whole, a tremendous service, I think.
Yes.
And that they produced what we stocked in law libraries, which was the books that contained the law. And they also set up the ways of indexing it, and which worked for them in those days. It's a beautiful thing. And that was part of the controversy.
And I used to teaching the basic legal research to first-year students. I don't know that I just loved telling them the story, whether or not they appreciated it. How chaotic it was before John West came along, and then this comprehensive reporting system and the digest system, and how that is just and in point of fact, our governments dropped the ball on this, handing it over to the private sector.
Even a lot of states where the Supreme Court reports might be published by the court or by the state, they would often drop that over the years for probably all the same reasons they drop other things.
Yes.
Somebody was
they
doing
weren't in
it
the business.
better, and it was expensive to do. And so when this Lexis came along and other competitors with similar services, it created this environment where a lot had to be sorted out.
Yes,
and you did a lot of the.
And
the others were sorting it out.
And again, it came up in that citations issue, and in the Copyright Committee, a lot of that was what we grappled with.
Understandably, the folks that owned West were not interested in giving away what they had built up over all these many years. Certainly not for free.
It was such a, going back to this whole thing, when we were first in the profession, there were many, many vendors. I remember Marion Gallagher talking about the Callahan man, who'd come around, and there were just so many different vendors, Mitchie and and different, there were small vendors, but there was such diversity, and
Mm-hmm.
in the consolidation that happened, down to, to just there being the two, it really affected so much, not only with the way we did business, but the way we interacted with those vendors. It changed the way we, met with them at the national meetings, and just it was just a different world.
Yeah.
And I think the citations thing and the controversy and the kind of resistance and pushback from West was part of that happened in those days.
Yeah, it was sort of unfortunate. I'll tell one more little story.
No, you go.
This is off our normal script.
Yeah.
I live, as you know, in Olympia, Washington,
Right.
which is not very close to the state of Virginia.
Mm.
Richmond, Virginia, is where the Mitchie Company, one of our publishers you just mentioned, was headquartered. There's a young gentleman that works in the bank I use, and his last name, I saw this on his name badge, was Mitchie. And I asked him one day if he had any connection to Virginia. He's a member of that family.
Wow. This is in Olympia?
In Olympia.
Mitchie,
He's
Mitchie.
moved west and down in life, and he's working at the bank now. But, he's a nice young gentleman. He's helped me with some stuff over the last few years.
That's a pretty small world.
But it is sort of a small world, yeah. He never actually worked for the company, but the
Yeah,
family
family
is the
did,
family
yeah.
that owned it.
Mhm.
So that was sort of interesting. Well, we were talking about some of the stuff you did.
Yeah,
Is there
I
anything-
think within the, I also was quite active in aspects of, in the ABA section of legal education and
Mhm.
admissions to the bar. Served on committees and also did, probably, in fact, I'm doing another one next month, site visits for the accreditation renewals. And actually, I did several new law school preliminary site visits as well. Those were always a learning experience, an amazing experience, and I learned so much from the colleagues that were on the team with me, as well as the institutions we were visiting, and counterparts and colleagues at these other institutions. Also, I was the chair of the Libraries Committee of the ABA section on legal education for several years. I think I did 2 terms back to back. And then overlapped with that, I served on the Standards Review Committee, the ABA, the committee that maintains and reviews and updates the accreditation standards for law schools. And in the course of my service on that committee, Chapter 6 of the standards was under review. Chapter 6 is the chapter on law libraries. And so it was a very intense time. This was a time we were in the early to mid 2000s. We were dealing with, remember, the very prescriptive collection standards.
Well, I remember.
And
Yeah.
just what you had to have.
What you had
in
a
your
list
collection
of
and
actual
sufficient
titles
copies,
and a number of
and
volumes.
And obviously that was ripe for revision
Mhm.
and for getting flexibility, and whether libraries were going to rely on the digital version versus the print version of any of these things, and how the standard had to be articulated so that there was guidance and there was actually some parameters so that the accrediting agency can be assured that law students were getting access to adequate and appropriate and in appropriate ways materials. But rewriting that and just airing that among our colleagues and in the profession was very controversial and very, very difficult, and coming up with the right wording. And that was, the Libraries Committee kind of advised the Standards Committee, and I was the one that was going back and forth on that. Also, we were also dealing with volume counts at the time, and how volume counts fit into the whole accreditation process. How do you count volumes for digital collections?
Yeah.
And how do the digital collections fit into this whole collection adequacy issue? And so the counting of, it became absurd. It really became absurd trying to
they'd
figure out.
have growing pains along the same
Oh,
lines
Lord.
when we got into microfilm.
Exactly,
And they finally
exactly.
came up with
The formula.
a formula.
An arbitrary formula,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. So that was a really interesting and very, very stimulating time and very stimulating discussions we had. Also, at that time, when I was serving on the Standards Review Committee and chairing the Committee on Libraries, Chapter 6 also included the provision 603 on the status of the library director.
I remember,
Again, very, very controversial, and continues to be to this day.
Yeah.
It has
Well, that
become...
has come up before. I mean,
Yes.
I was involved in the leadership of the association a decade or so
Yes.
earlier, and
Yes.
it was on the agenda then.
Yes, it's on the table just about every time they come up to look
Yeah.
at it. And it was, in the end, it got very much tied to the Chapter 4 standard on faculty in general and the tiers of faculty. And that became such a controversial thing in and of itself that the status library director thing, along with all those other status issues, were basically not dealt with that time around, that cycle around. But I believe it is up again, and it will continue to be, because it's that's a tough nut, and the whole tenure issue is a tough nut.
Yeah, I understand tenure itself is under reconsideration as a standard.
Right.
And I personally, having come up through a system where I, among other colleagues, enjoyed tenure and could see the advantages to the institution as well as to ourselves of that. I certainly have my own views, but I'm not part of it anymore. So
Right.
it's called retirement.
Yes.
Keep my views somewhat more to myself.
At the University of Utah, they had post-tenure reviews. Every 5 years there were post-tenure reviews, and these were mandated. They were not mandated when I came on board, but then in the 90s they implemented a mandatory 5-year review process, which in itself became very controversial. I mean, we had faculty members who just absolutely refused to respond to the request for information about what they were doing post-tenure. And so that's kind of an aspect of tenure that's not as good as some other of the more healthy aspects.
Anything can have its good side and its abusive side, and tenure is not any different.
Right.
So I found, for the most part, but only for the most part, my colleagues, as they got tenure, continued with their work.
Oh, yes.
Beyond that.
Yeah.
But there were an occasional one who changed his approach to what work was all about.
You're right. And then certainly we had very, very prolific faculty who just post-tenure, you never know that there was any difference. And that was mostly the case. It's just the fact that having to submit that report was what they got into their...
Well, it was something they hadn't had to do before.
Well, yes, and supposedly
Although
I'm done with that.
in a way they did, because, every year their salary would be reviewed by usually the dean. And what was the dean taking into consideration?
Right,
Probably the same sorts of stuff, and may or may not ask for an annual report would include that. So maybe life was changing, but not as tremendously as some of them thought.
Right. Well, this gets beyond, beyond the notion of the status of the library director. It's just, it is caught up in that bigger issue. I think I was a member of the library, the law faculty, and tenured, but it was always kind of, there was never quite the rest of the faculty were never quite sure what that meant in my case, because I wasn't publishing the way they were publishing. I did publish some, and some, and not in the more substantive law areas, and that was always it was clear that I was different, even though I was tenured.
Well, I think the fact that you taught, as some people call it, a stand-up course, where you actually are before a class, gave you a legitimacy in their eyes, because you were doing something much more like they do.
Right.
Than a librarian who perhaps didn't teach in a substantive course or even a first-year research course. So I think, in a sense, the more you did like what they did, even if it was on because you had another day job, would help in their perception of you being a colleague?
Well, that, and I think the service programs that we had were so integral to what the faculty were doing. And that really, I think, not only for myself, but for our librarians, gave us all very good credibility and acceptance. Our librarians attended the still attend faculty brown bag presentations, and and ask questions and participate, and that's it's all it's very healthy for everybody if the library as a whole, including the library director, have a good reputation and good profile with the faculty.
I remember even when I came into the profession, which is back around the late 60s, and even then, the question of whether the law library director should be a regular faculty member in some sense, or whatever, how that was defined, was an issue of the day. I remember with job interviews, they asked me outright if my views, and they were basically that yes, I thought the faculty member should be. The director should be a faculty member and should be participating in faculty kinds of things. Realizing that he or she did have another role that the others didn't have, like a dean has, the administrative aspects of it. And then over the years, sort of the last part of my career, we saw the clinicians come up, and they were teaching, but a lot of schools, they didn't have normal faculty status, tenure, or anything like that. We ultimately gave it to them in America, but that was a big controversy for a while, and then how would we go about it? And it all got worked out and became sort of the norm there.
Right.
But it's not every place.
No.
And then as the teaching of legal writing became more of a profession, where people, instead of being brought in temporarily or something, would come in more or less semi-permanently. And they were taking on faculty roles. What would their status be? And I think that has got to have, so we say, cluttered up the questions of everybody, including the library director.
That's true.
It's probably what you saw in the ABA.
Yes,
as part of that.
And boy, the legal writing faculty would show up at every single hearing, and they felt the strongest of anybody in their approaches to the standards review committee, and what they needed, what they saw as their inferior status or their unsecured status.
If you're not
status,
like everybody else, you're in a secondary role as far as you perceive it, and probably everybody else.
And as the students perceive it.
Exactly. You may have the title professor, but it may be a little more of a hollow title if you don't also have the what else traditionally goes with that title. Well, you have had an interesting, and it sounds like somewhat continuing career. You said you're about to do another site inspection.
I said to them, I am retired, and they said, oh, we like to use retired librarians. They actually spend more time working on the reports than the active directors do, because they're able to put the time in and get the reports in on time. So
well, no wonder they pick retirees. You know the drill, and you do it.
I mean, I'm a known quantity to them at this point. I've done probably 18 or 20 of them.
Well, it was interesting in our early days, at least in mine, it was pretty unguided, the reports. I mean, you had the standards, but you didn't have the guides that later were developed. When Jim White was the consultant at the ABA on legal education, they got very systematic.
Well, I remember then Don Dunn developed he developed a thing that was a guide for people who were doing the library part.
Yes.
And Don
Very
Dunn's little
helpful.
crib sheet was very helpful.
Very helpful, and probably helped head off a lot of potential problems that could well have developed if they hadn't systematized this.
Exactly, yes.
Well, Rita, we've had an interesting conversation, but we're sort of nearing the end. But, it's customary for me to ask if there's anything we haven't talked about that you would like to bring up.
I don't think so. I think that the my career was very, very fulfilling. I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed my colleagues in law librarianship. I enjoyed my colleagues in libraries generally. At Utah, I had very good relations with my colleagues in the Maine University Library and in the medical library. And our librarians were one faculty, the library faculty of campus, and librarians really got to know each other across campus, which is, I think, very, very healthy. Utah has, I think, unique consortium of academic law libraries that's called the Utah Academic Library Consortium, UALC. And we would meet every other month or so for a day, and it was everybody. It was the big schools and the junior, 2-year schools, and from all over the state. We would, travel to each other's campuses and to whoever was hosting. So I really got to know libraries and librarians across the state, which was very satisfying to me. So it's been a good journey for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like it still continues in its own way.
Yeah, but retirement is good too.
Yeah.
I'm fine
Well,
with that.
I've been retired, as people who've listened to any of these know, for now 11 years.
Yeah.
And, it's a wonderful phase of life, I
Yes.
think.
I'm
At
happy
least
with it.
the part I'm in still.
Yeah.
Maybe as I get older, things
Yeah.
will change a little bit. But, well, that's reality too. Well, thank you, Rita Reusch, for talking with us today on the camera here, and for the oral history of legal law librarianship. I'm thanking you on my behalf, of course, and also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Kodak, and Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have the opportunity and honor to be putting together this oral history for the Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf portion of Pine Online. Thank you.